The pinnacle of motorsport is back, with the heroes of two-wheeled racing at the helm again from Milestone. This Italian gaming studio has pretty much been making racing games right from when they started, back in the 90s. They've pretty much single-handedly been the star of motorcycle racing throughout that time. Now, with the real-life action currently in hiatus, this could not arrive at a better time for me, and certainly to fill our summer racing delights. If we get to see some real-life MotoGP action at some point this year, we can certainly fill our delights with a great title here. But with many changes, upgrades and improvements been made since the last time we saw it, with the question on your lips and many, is this the best bike racer you can buy? Well, let's suit up, leave the pits, and put it to the test. Motorcycle racing has never been given the love it deserves, and certainly I think it deserves. I've been riding bikes and been a huge two-wheeled nut since I can remember. Hang-On was probably one of the biggest influences on my gaming versions of bike action, with it hitting the arcades and being where I sunk many pounds of my money back in the 80s. And since then we've had a generation of titles that have tried to push those things forward. The best racing game for bikes, in my opinion, is still the classic almighty Polyphony Digital Tourist Trophy. I don't think anything comes close to the passion and effort that was put in to one of the best motorcycle titles, although it's probably one of the worst racing games because you've only got a handful of people on track at any one time. It would be amazing if they could push that forward. We've certainly had some visually splendid titles over the years, such as the Drive Club edition with the bikes, but now Milestone have got their hands on a better engine in Unreal Engine 4, and over the past couple of years they've improved and worked hard to get the most out of it. So covering this technical review, we will discuss the PC version, but the first thing to discuss is it is available on all consoles including the Switch, and for the first time a great bonus is the fact that on both the Pro and the Xbox One X it now has two options, with one option allowing you to select 60 FPS mode, which is absolutely vital for a racing game, and I am so happy that Milestone have finally put that in. It's a shame that base consoles still get 30 FPS, but 60 FPS is the best way to play, and I think it's an obvious sign to just flick it on and never look back if you're playing on the Pro version. Here on the PC we've obviously got far more options, right up to 120 FPS, which is still viable here at 2880 by 1620 on my RTX 2070, but it is quite a demanding title on GPU, so just be aware of that, but I'll cover that more in the visual section. So discussing graphics first, it's a very clean and sharp looking title. There's no issues at all in terms of the detail on objects in the distance, the track quality and overall the IQ, with multiple options on the PC version, but using the Unreal Engine TAA solution is the best option because it just gives more stability and obviously a clean sharp image if you can bump the resolution up above 1080p. If you can't, then maybe dropping to FXAA may claw back some performance levels and sharpen the image, but anything above 1440 or thereabouts is pretty much bang on for me, and that obviously means on my machine here I can easily run 120 FPS on the relevant monitor. Luckily my 4K screen supports 120 FPS, so I'm pretty good, and that means that performance is smooth and consistent, but there were a couple of issues. Certain tracks, certain corners, certain views can have the title judder ever so slightly. We're talking a couple of skips into 33 milliseconds, or if you're running 120 FPS, then we're talking some skips into 16 milliseconds, skipping between the two, and that can be felt no matter how hard. So I will look forward to some patches just to improve those subtle elements, but they are very, very minor. But again, the first person view going around corners, you can feel that slight judder, and that means that input times can be slightly affected, but overall it's very, very consistent. Animation has been greatly improved, now using 3D scan models, and they've definitely improved their ragdoll physics, interaction and animation. You can change your riding style very much like Tourist Trophy by having more of a hang-off Marc Marquez style, elbow down, Thomas Luthi style, all the classic Rossi style, and that includes the foot dangle to try and maximize that gravity as the front wheel starts to pivot as you brake really heavy, and that's a good element in the title itself, which I'll touch on a little later. Now visually, they do have quite a good selection of options there. SSR is used across reflections both on shiny areas of the tank and certain parts of the track, and they did certainly use particles on collisions and scraping metal as you come off. There's a great sense of motion and speed, and the camera shake on some of the onboard shots is very impressive. It's not quite as good as the previous title I covered in the AMA Motocross, but it is very, very close to the original MotoGP action you see on screen, and that means it works consistently across the board, and that includes those trackside shots and TV style replays when you're outside of the bike. Like I say, it's a clean and crisp game, but it does mean that suffers in terms of post-processing effects. Bloom is quite a nice touch and some lens flare on some of the tracks, and I love the fact that they've really maximised the Qatar track, which has 3 separate times of day in the real life in terms of races. Moto 3 is taken in the day as normal, Moto 2 is taken just as sunset drops, and then MotoGP is under the floodlights as you would expect, and it's a grand opener. We've missed it this year, but when you play the 3 classes across those different times of day, it does emphasize how good the lighting system is, and even though it's baked into the levels itself to obviously be set at that time of race, the Moto 2 race is the most impressive to look at and really highlights just how good the lighting system can be in certain areas. Overall, the sunnier tracks look excellent. Racing down Mugello, one of the fastest tracks on that straight of over 220 miles per hour down that back straight on a certain MotoGP bike, then it does certainly recreate that feel of sense of speed, and I love the wind turbulence and blast as your head wobbles around, and it looks superb. The only problem I've got with the game is the texture quality, the asset quality is still very much back in the older titles. They haven't really brought this kicking and screaming into the modern age. There's some very low resolution texture maps, some very low resolution textures rather than details used on objects, such as the cars at the beginning, which repeat very often. You can see the headlights are just more like a sticker than an actual headlight. It's not that any of this is terrible, it's just that it's let down by the higher quality elsewhere. There's certainly a lot of work to be done on assets, materials and texture quality, making it more consistent overall. And then there's some of these small little blemishes in terms of the motion blur looks like a texture overlay, which obviously looks very weak. The shadows can flicker and move. There's some bugs in the game with objects appearing and disappearing, specifically online. The temporal AA can cause blemishes and multiple images of objects as you whisk past the camera. But this is being pretty nitpicky at a title that looks as good as this, and visually is certainly up there with the best titles in terms of bikes in modern gaming, and at 60 FPS or more it always looks as close to the real thing as you can get, well, without actually getting on track yourself. So sound design and execution is always a vital part of motorcycle racing, and they really have got this down pat. There's many classes: Moto3, Moto2, MotoGP, the 4-stroke, the 500cc, the epic 500cc's, and they all sound sufficiently different and audible when you're playing the game. First person with the helmet view, you get reverb in certain areas, such as the Sepang test when you're going down the main straight and the echoing around the stadium, and with the helmet on, everything's muffled appropriately. You can hear the engine and exhaust notes even louder from the rear, which is the example I've just given you there from the Desmond GT, the Ducati bike, and all of that really adds to the atmosphere of the title. Anyone who races and rides bikes knows the sound of a beautiful exhaust or that raspy airbox. Certainly on my Kawasaki, it's all part and parcel. And you can also hear the engines of bikes behind you and around you, and playing this with a set of headphones just amplifies that feeling even more. I cannot stress how good the engines are. They're not exactly accurate, but they're as close as I've heard in a video game for a very long time, and I don't think anyone is really going to complain about the quality on offer here. The audio is up there with the visuals. And that leaves the most important part, and that is the game itself, what it contains and how it plays. So the first thing is choice. There's an epic amount of choice on offer here. You've got standard time trials, you can load straight into a championship mode, you've got historic mode, which is one of my favourites. Playing some of the old riders and racers of years gone by, such as Sete Gibernau, Max Biaggi. The rivalry between Gibernau, Rossi and Biaggi was legendary back in the day. And then you've got such as classics as Tajiro Kato, who unfortunately was one of the most famous riders to die in MotoGP, who could have been a rising star. And all of those elements and the quality they've brought to the character models, the faces and the bikes themselves really brings me back to a title that I actually love to play, both the modern and the retro stuff. They are going to add more in the class, so Moto E and the Red Bull Rookies will be added later post launch. And then you've got all the other options, such as the online racing, which again is very quick and efficient. You can create a race directors mode where you manage the whole track itself, who's in, the quality, the settings, everything else, or you can just jump straight into an online title and play against other people. Again though, you have to get used to the quality here, because even though I ride a bike for real and I can race around a track, video game racing isn't the same as real racing, and some people are so good at this title that you just can't touch them. I'm lucky to get podiums in certain races, so it's really tough but enjoyable. And the fact that it's dedicated servers across all formats with low latency and fast response means you don't have any concerns on the multiplayer side as well, if you want to jump away from the championship mode, which is where the bread and butter and meat of the title actually is. And this is where I really think they've stepped up the game and delivered a title that's up there with the FIFAs and the F1s now in terms of the quality they've got in the box. You've got the whole choice to start from the Red Bull Rookies when that comes out, but Moto3, create your own character or pick a team, create your own team, change your own livery, change your leathers, your helmet, your number, design everything you want from scratch or take something off the shelf. And then you've got all the additional elements in terms of your personal manager, your chief engineer, your data engineer, and then manage the entire squad throughout the season to improve the engine, the frame, the suspension and the data analytics to just get more out of the engine and improve the quality of both you as a rider and the bike itself. And then in addition to this, you've got the entire suite of winter tests and mid-season tests in MotoGP, and to the point that the winter test, actually you're allowed to pick 3 separate packages, and then you choose the best one over your race runs to work out which is the best setting for you and use that as you start the season, because it locks that engine and frame down just like real MotoGP. And then you work your way up, you secure better rides, you win races, get points, and then obviously not every team will take you straight away. You can't go from Moto3 straight to MotoGP, they're just not interested in you. You have to earn your stripes, and this is what makes the game excellent. Working your way up and building your character to the point where you're at the GP Championship is actually very enjoyable, and it's a great fun title to play. In terms of simulation, it's as close as you possibly can get when you're replacing 2 wheels, handlebars and a tank with a joypad and a set of earphones, but it's as close as possible to the real thing in the sense of being realistic but forgivable. You have got all of the options to tweak, set and adjust the bike, so you can adjust the rake, the trail, the steering head, and as you can see from some of my on screen, I ride this like I do a real bike, and I make the front very responsive but very light. I like the bike to turn quickly and hold a line, but that makes it unstable, and that means it wheelies a lot and wheels its head a lot and shakes its head a lot, and you have to understand that that's how bikes are supposed to be. If it wobbles and shakes, that's actually, it's automatically balancing itself. Bikes are inherently, due to the gyroscopic gyroscopic motion designed to stay that way. The reason I'm saying all this is not a physics lesson, it's because that the team have worked really hard to deliver that in the title itself. You can see how the bike and rider are separate. Coming out of corners, the bike will shake its head, the rider will wobble, the front will shake and lift, the rear will squat and compress. And then in the entire settings, you can go in and tweak the ratios of your gear to get the right speed. You can change your fuel mappings, your traction control, your anti-wheeling, your engine braking system, just to adjust it as you're riding as well from the settings on the dash, just like real races. And the fuel area is also managed, again, just like real MotoGP. They're given a set amount of fuel that they have to use, and if you whack up the power to max, you'll burn your fuel out and you'll just be left stranded. And I've lost races doing that because I forget about the fuel, and that's what really brings this title to me for me. It's so realistic and engaging, you really get lost for hours on end just working your way through the championships. Using all of the offers there you've got in terms of getting a better rider, getting a better manager, getting a better chief engineer. And if you're not used to all these settings, you don't understand how any of it works, you don't know your trail from your rake, from your compression, your rebound, you don't know anything about all those settings on a bike and a fork and the rear shock, and you can just use the engineer mode, tell him what your problems are in terms of corner entry, corner exit, speed, and they will set an automatic setting in there from the track side, and you can just go out and give it a go. And this obviously makes the game accessible to everybody, but it's also the fact that they've spent the time to manage the physics and the interaction. There's asymmetric tyres there, which means both sides of the tyre in the middle are actually made of 3 separate compounds. So some of the tyres, some of the tracks are asymmetrical. You'll spend more time on the right hand side and the left hand side, and those tyres wear unevenly, and you have to be aware of that even coming from testing sessions, because again, tyres are limited, so you have to change your tyres, choose the right ones for the track conditions, the weather, hard, soft, medium, to make it last the race. And the tyres wear accordingly. So if you spend time on somewhere like the Saxon Ring, which is predominantly a dirt track style race track, which everyone used to talk about in terms of American dirt track racing, so you spend a lot of the time on the left hand side of the tyre. That track is incredibly difficult to ride around in terms of tyre usage, and therefore you get that long left hand all the way around the track, and then all of a sudden you hit the waterfall, which is a strong right-hander downhill off camber. That means the tyres wear. If you race this on 32-40 laps and then use those asymmetrical tyre settings and let them degrade realistically in the engine, you can feel the difference. The tyre stops gripping and the front end starts tucking and pulling away from you. You can feel that when you're playing the game, and I love the fact they've spent all that time, care and attention to push the simulation of the title, and I really enjoy it, as you can probably tell. It's the best motorcycle racing game I've ever played, bar none. It's got all the elements you need. There's definitely areas for improvement, of course. Some of the graphical glitches could be fixed up and tied to the materials, like I've said. It crashed a couple of times, possibly memory leaks on PC I had as well. And then there's other elements where I think they could improve the animation system, the intro, the pizzazz, and certainly the commentary is pretty poor. Some of the lines you come out with when you're leaving the pits or hitting or sitting on the grid just are laughable. So there's definitely ways they can improve the title. I'd like some of those super slow-mos, which you can put into the game yourself by slowing the game down. But generally, I'm a massive fan of the game. It's the best representation of MotoGP, and it's absolutely packed with different options and months, if not years, of entertainment value, not including the modern stuff, but all the retro historic races in there as well. I just can't get enough of MotoGP, but I do love motorcycle racing, so if you hate bikes, then you're not really going to change anything here. It's a great involved motorcycle game, and one that I absolutely adored. Pick it up on PC, on all consoles including Switch. If you do enjoy racing, this certainly has all the treats you could ask for and a little bit more. Hopefully this review gave you food for thought and a good view of what the title offers. Anyway, that's it. I'm off for more MotoGP action and to look at my bike and stare at the sunshine and wait for me to go out and do the real thing again. I'll catch you on the next one.
Rider has been able to impose a frantic pace on today's race, and now he and his mechanics are rightly going to party.